Right on.
Upgrade complete.
Somebody call for an exterminator. That's what I thought. Your unit has arrived. Ready to roll out. Battle cruiser operational.
So, this is the official start of the 35th episode of the Undermind, and my guests today are Antiga, hi Antiga,
Hey, hello.
and Hao Pan, hi.
Hi, Jean-Claude.
So, the usual question as well, what you've been up to lately. And I realized that I was listening back to some previous podcasts, and we tend to focus on bot development only, which is fine because basically that's what it's about. But you feel free to share some maybe not that related personal goings on and stuff. Of course, nothing that too personal, just maybe generally about development, software development, and stuff our audience can relate to. So let's start with you, Antiga. What's up?
Well, I'm been in talks with a possible sponsor for AIST, and all I can say at this point is there will be a prize, and it'll be a good one. For winning AIST, I can't talk about exactly what it is or what's occurring yet, but something is going to happen. You've been forewarned.
Something will happen eventually. That's good news.
It will have something likely to do with drones, autonomous drones, something like that. Um, um, I can't say any more than that yet.
I hope not the Zerg drones. And when is AIST actually? What's the submission deadline?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here that I got to remember. It's in the spring.
Okay.
February, March. um,
All right. So, how what is up with you? How it's going?
Yes, think things are going well. As you know, we did a somewhat of a sort of a stream of bad quality, just largely due to my internet problem. But I mean, following the line, I've been doing some code cleanup because over the time, I have quite a few builds for them for my bot, and I've been trying to clean up the code as much as I can. And a lot of times I've seen my code that it does one thing at a place, then after a few like 50 or so lines, and it does something again for the same build, which it just put just I didn't feel too good about this kind of code, so I try to clean it up and make it more organized that way. So that's one thing I've been trying lately, and also since I did the long distance mining, and sort of the reason I did this in the stream is because funnily enough, the day before we did the stream, I realized my bot wasn't doing the long distance mining properly. And yeah, that's one of the main reasons why I chose this topic. And after the stream, I try to implement such technique or skill. I feel this is kind of thing that it's not gonna be very useful, but it's something that a bot should have if you wanted to, be successful. And also, but and I think the third aspect of what I've been doing is the figuring out what can be done better versus those big protosses. Because as you can see, the top 10 on the ladder currently, most of them are Protoss, and they still do not have good answers to their, a lot of their strategies. So I try to improve my bot a little bit in that aspect. Yes.
Yeah, it seems that we have a long ongoing Protoss domination on the SSCIT ladder, and we have analyzed a little bit this. There are many factors, and sample size is not good enough to draw any big conclusions from this. But I think maybe some Protoss units benefit more from micro than other ones. But that's alone not enough to explain the win rate, but then again, sample size is maybe not enough.
It has to do too with the number of very competitive authors involved in projects. At any given time, there's really only like half a dozen different people or groups that are actually trying to win. And how those are divided among the races makes a big difference in what the ladder looks like. And at the moment, a lot of those have been on the Protoss side of the fence lately.
Oh yeah, and let's not forget that there are quite few Locutus forks, and yeah, some, like most of the bots are related to each other somehow. So we have some inbreeding as well.
There's some, of course, Locutus is related to Beta Star, but you'd be hard pressed to say that Purple Wave or Banana Brain are anything but independent. Similarly, McRave is also really an independent bot. So Purple Wave, Banana Brain, and McRave share almost no code with each other, or very very little. The only ones that really do are Locutus, Beta Star, and Dakin.
Definitely. And just go back to the previous point, but I wanted to talk about that. I think live recording the Undermind I long resisted, but it was a good idea because last time there was considerable audience participation, and I'm very glad for that. Like oftentimes it is hard to, it would be so good to get some outside feedback because it's 2 or 3 guests, sometimes 4. Maybe we don't have all the perspectives covered.
Yeah, it's cool to see what questions people ask and things.
Yeah, just to note that. And with that, next topic I prepared is the live coding sessions. I hope you were a part of that. Like you said, it was unfortunate because your internet was spotty, and I am very annoyed about that because the code itself was very interesting and I loved that what you achieved. But in general, it seems that the coding streams are surprisingly popular. Even people who are not coders were interested in some of them. And I'd like to especially talk about the one with Nightcat when we built a bot from scratch. Now, I don't think that this has such a big impact, but maybe someone will decide to take up bot development after watching that. We can hope. It will certainly help if you begin to do that.
I certainly really enjoy watching the streams. I don't catch them all, but um, My favorite so far has been the banana brain one. I found that the most interesting.
I don't have a favorite. I can't have a favorite. I must maintain my famous impartiality to everything. But yeah, that was a very good stream.
The other one that I really liked a lot was the Locutus one version for his development environment for his second sort of bot um, is really sort of like a second generation development approach, or maybe it's like a third or fourth gen. He's really got a great development environment with Cherry Viz and that sort of setup that he allows him to test with and debug easily is really going to make for quick progress, I think. And I think that other bot authors that are serious will may down the road adopt some of the approaches that he's pioneering with his development environment. I think it's really forward thinking what he's done there.
Tools that we use to develop. It's very important to develop new ones, share them with the community, and bring attention to them. Like Sherivis is a very good example. I haven't used it, but not because I have anything against it. It just didn't occur to me that hey, this is some cool thing that I want to use. But after seeing this, I will definitely integrate that into my projects when I get to it. So yeah, just talk to each other and share stuff.
Things that make development go quicker, take less time, and make it easier to debug issues are helpful. We spend a lot of time, bot developers do, trying to debug things that are hard to debug, and having an environment that makes that easier is very helpful.
We spend a lot of time solving the same problems.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, one of the things I want to do is you might be aware that I started to write a book about BW API and publishing it on my website. One of the planned chapters will be called something like Common Solutions to Common Problems. And what I would like to achieve here is that you don't have to wrestle as much with BW API itself. Like, do you want a basic mining algorithm? Here you go. Do you want a basic map analysis algorithm? Here you go. The goal is not to have the best of them, but to somewhat level the playing field if you're entering this one a little bit later. And especially if you want to do something like, okay, only new bots allowed in this tournament, but you can start from a certain baseline, because a bot that is trying to mine more efficiently does not make for an entertaining watch.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time on things like that. I think that you're probably familiar. I'm trying to remember who wrote it. I have it bookmarked. There's the common BW API bugs and issues Word doc that's been floating around for years now. And some of the common problems that are encountered are addressed in there and may make for good material for inclusion in a common issues list. A really good example is how extractors work with Zerg is a really common crash point for a lot of new authors.
The famous shared Google document of Dan's called, unusual unit transitions, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Because there's some really weird stuff that goes on when you try and morph an extractor as Zerg. And then another thing is what you do with an extractor that dies um, is another problem.
Yeah. It is unusual BW unit transitions. I almost got it right, but yes, I have it bookmarked as well. And yes, I intend to document such stuff in the book eventually, but it is a huge undertaking. Any feedback or addition to the topics so far?
Well, just a little thing. When I started the fresh meat, I just feel the need. Well, so I try to find the try something. I was hoping to do something simple. For example, the finding the base. For example, the natural or the third. But then I surrendered because it's just so much easier with the BWE man or and BWEB because oftentimes we don't want to reinvent the wheel if there are available libraries. Um, yeah, so I I fully appreciate the existence of such libraries, and it just speed up things quite a bit for us to bot developers.
I have something else related to that, but a little bit later. And yeah, speaking of SSCEIT, the actual tournament deadline is looming closer. I think it's in early December. I don't know from top of my head, but yeah, it's not too far, and I'm really wondering what kind of stuff we will see. Um, I was looking at the bot uploads, and the popular bots are not refreshed as often lately. But maybe that's just how it is, not a trend. I think everyone is holding a little back.
Yeah, that's normal for tournaments. The top competitors release on the tournament deadlines, and then kind of they might do a couple test updates after tournament to test some weird funky stuff, but then they always hold back something for the tournament season. They don't want to show all their cards immediately. That's normal.
Yeah, that's how it should be. Uh, we always like to have surprises. And also, Crazio uploaded his Terran bot, and it's on the top of the ladder. Although the win rate is lower than Lokitus, the LO rating is higher still. So it's nice to see him back, and yeah, it produces quite good games, I think.
Yeah, his bot is so adjustable on so many different ways as far as attack timings and pre-building units independent of the build orders, of which he has like 25 a matchup. um, that oftentimes when new bots come on the ladder, if they beat him for a couple days, he just locally does training, then uploads new learning files, and he's ahead again. So he's not an easy opponent. And the re-upload of Saida under the name Audius um, made it so he lost a pair of games, but then he just had to go back and do his retraining against Saida opponents, and he's back on top again, winning in that matchup.
Have you personally played against Crazio lately?
I have. He wasn't terribly happy about it because I four-pilled him like 30 games in a row. I had a request about every about a year. Somebody asked me, just can you still kill the number one bot on the ladder with only a four-pill? And people don't tend to believe me when I tell them yes. um, and so that's probably the third or fourth time I've done that. I sat down and just four pooled Crazio for a couple of evenings on stream. Um, and yep, it still is as of about 2 weeks ago. It loses every time to four pull if you control it well.
Interesting. It's I didn't know that. I'm ashamed, but I didn't really watch your streams lately.
No, it's all right. I mean, it's just an easy thing to do. You know, but people get so interested in, you know, there's so much doubt that this is possible that you can still four pull in 2019 the top bot on the ladder and be really successful at it. Um, that people are like, no way, you can't do that. That's impossible. Um, no, there's a lot that is not being done on the micro and control side in bot development. Most very few bots have any type of real path. They don't explore around bases or exits or entrances or really any of that sort of stuff. And yeah, things are still exploitable.
There are a ton of stuff still needs to be done, and there is a development metagame, so to speak, that maybe pathfinding is too much effort for too little gain at this stage. Although who knows? As you said, maybe a well-executed for-pool bot could dominate the ladder for a while.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a lot of work, and also it's very computationally expensive to do collisions for all of your units and calculate it every frame. It's not just a programming problem; it's also a performance problem. As unit sizes go up, it kind of becomes more and more intensive to have that as an active tool.
Yeah, definitely, and yeah, I'm quite familiar with that side of things, but it's by no means impossible.
I think that Sticks, Bytekeeper's bot is showing, it's a jump from like 80th place to being the top Zerg in a week with a whole bunch of different improvements, but new build orders. But he has some really cool micro unit stuff going on in there, and his new sort of custom combat simulator that's unique to him. He's gone from like a 25% win rate on average to like an 85% win rate on average in a week. So that's very enjoyable to see. And I think he's on the right track. And he's only running one build in all three matchups doing that and having that high of a win rate, which is really fascinating. So he's spending all of his time not on builds, but on micro and control and perfection of technique, which is makes it what he's working on there a little bit unique compared to many other projects.
Yeah, it's surprising that Styx even managed to get some few wings off of Crisio. I think it had something to do with some flaws in Crisio. For example, the wall is not circling tight, or in another game, the lanes just ran by the bunker and killed the workers. So it just almost a straight loss for Crisio. So yeah, there is some sort of luck there, but I but I definitely was impressed by how much progress Styx has made so far in terms of its elo standing and also the good stuff that the author Bitkeeper put in his spot.
Yeah,
It
go on.
looks like from his posting, he's using JBW API. He's also using his own custom ASS simulator, its nickname ASS. And he's using some stuff called JTS, which I'm not very familiar with. And he's also, like Lakutis has done, he's got a Cherry Viz working for development for him. He kind of took a page out of what we just talked about. So he's using JS Onitor and ZST dlib as well. So it's interesting.
So speaking of the SSAIT tournament again, I'm curious how many new participants we will see. I was thinking about this and I'd like to reiterate my earlier analysis. I've been, I think, mentioned that I categorized the participant in SSAIT into a broad outline of groups. And yeah, the one prominent ones is university students, which seems to have a fire and forget mentality. Most of them just do a thesis, then move on. Some of them stay, but most don't. And if you remember, I mentioned this to Dave Churchill, and we concluded that there isn't too much we can do about that. I don't know what's your stance on that.
I'm not wholly in the know of what classes are going on right now. Um, I would assume Dave's got a class with undergrads and stuff, maybe some master's students. Um, but I'm not sure which universities are doing classes for this fall, and if any of them are requiring submission. That's totally a separate thing. Whether they have to make one for the class, and then also if they're required to be submitted to the tournament. The Student StarCraft AI tournament is a student-focused tournament, and there's extra prizes available there for students and first-time comers. So um, it should be interesting how that turns out. I just don't know enough about what's currently going on that side of the academic stuff at the moment.
Maybe we should, in general, again, contact more universities about this. I don't know if that would be a worthwhile endeavor.
I've thought about doing it here locally, but I'm still up in the air. I'm a little busy at the moment, but maybe next year. We'll see.
Okay, so in this case, we have Alpha Star's hype and the whole SC2 scene a little bit bringing attention to this, but I think in this particular case this works against us because Brood War is not really a game that is current and hyped that much. Mostly a little bit older people play it, and I would reckon that a lot of SC2's player base is younger than Brood War itself. That's not to comment on them or the quality of them, just a statement. And it is understandable that they don't want to play an elegant game from a more civilized age. So about universities, I really don't know. I don't even know how to begin to do that because academics have a way of communicating with the outside world and with each other, and that I'm not familiar with. If you ever try to reach a professor outside from the university, you have noticed this.
Can be hard. Some are also very responsive, though. I've asked, professors to give me copies of papers that I would otherwise have to pay for, and they tend to be very acclimating for things like that. 80-90% of them will send you a copy for free, right? If you contact them directly. So, there are some difficulties. They're under a lot of stress with universities and the politics that go on there and things like that. But I think that, most people are professors because they want to do something to help and help other people. If they're purely self-interested, they probably wouldn't be involved in that profession. So
Yeah, and I don't want to generalize or not or say that this wouldn't be worth it. I think shooting off a few emails might be good. So going on with my analysis, the second group is university researchers who have worked on bots, and the problem is here. I feel that most of the researchers are rather work or they rather work on infrastructure and stuff that lets them do their research, and they're not really competitive or interested in being a very competitive entity on the ladder for a long time, and that's fine.
yeah, and it's totally understandable given their incentive model. It's all about writing papers and getting grant money and teaching classes, and nowhere in that model is winning. So it's understandable.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of also, I think my situation is kind of similar to the situations the students are possibly in, because for countless times people have asked me, so why are you doing this StarCraft AI as your day job? What kind of end product are you trying to come up with, and why would that benefit the company? Well, I mean, So as I said, like the students, so I'm more interested in getting some publication done and writing some papers and well, writing as many papers as I can, but I'm not trying to, for the sake of writing paper just to write papers, but I also want some quality research being done. So it's kind of my kind of comments on this topic.
Oh, it, yeah, it's interesting. It also brings up something else. About 2 years ago, when TorchCraft first came out, I guess, or was first released, there was some discussion about creating a Brood War machine learning base that could be used for more sort of um, pure AI development than um, uh, just a set of if statements, which is what we do a lot nowadays. But the idea was to um, create basically a base with as little other things in it as possible that people could use as a way to compare different algorithms to each other and learning rates to try and optimize towards specific targets. So, say if you have a map and you want to do the amount of time to mine out on the map as the end goal on a specific map, and then you want to use uh, the basically a zero start machine learning models of different types and algorithms to see how quickly you can achieve that goal in the least number of cycles. Um, but that project sort of fell apart because there wasn't really anyone to collaborate with on doing it, and there's some technical difficulties in making it work. So just putting it out there that if there are academics or researchers that are interested in collaborating to create that base, I'm very interested in helping make that possible.
Yeah, and this brings us the question how to maybe monetize this scene a little bit. Maybe monetize is not the best word, but I think at some point in time, money has to enter the cycle because servers cost money and people's times are not free. And I seen that I think that's the big next step that somehow get some people paid to work on this.
We've talked about this a little bit on previous podcasts. Well, the bit that I just mentioned is more about getting grant money for different projects in universities by helping provide a base that can be used for development. And there's that whole academic funding grant world, which is more based around writing papers and stuff like we've been talking about. Now, there's also the whole corporate world, which has to do a lot more to do with sponsorship and teams and things like that. Um, I think I said as much on a previous podcast, but I think that it's really appealing to if a small, AI research company or something like this sponsors an individual bot, they get some good press. They get their name out there that they're sponsoring um, a project, and I think there's opportunities there to almost view individual bots less like programming projects and more like sports teams.
Definitely, definitely, and that's one of my categories, like the company bots, and this is the largest source of support for this community, or potentially the largest source, I should say. But I absolutely have no idea how to entice more companies to participate. And maybe the tournament format is not the most appealing to them. That's all I could gather.
Maybe, maybe not. Um, Tournaments are more based around number of eyeballs watching and pay click ad conversion and all that fun stuff. But I think there's an opportunity for individual bot authors. I tried to talk McGrave a while ago into just having like a little development blog and selling like T-shirts and mugs and stuff like that um, people could use to support his bot and his development project. And the more income that he has from that, the more motivation he has to work on different aspects. And people could even put out, you know, the bug bounty program is a really interesting thing for development. If people want to see a specific feature, they can donate towards it, and he'll work on it, right? Um, but I don't haven't really seen an author. I mean, you've done with the Undermind podcast, with Undermind and Main Computer Do Things. You sort of have a blog, and you're starting to do some merchandising and things like that. But I think there's opportunities for individual bots to do that sort of thing as well.
Speaking of that, this is time for our announcement, which is thank you for very well presenting introduction to this topic. Yeah, as you might have known, I started a Patreon. It's patreon.com/mcdt, and I'd like to give a huge thanks to my very first patron, Bruce Nielsen, the author of Locutus. He is the first person to place his trust into me and support the site and everything I do. All the proceeds are going to paying web hosting first of all, and everything I do. The podcasts, the AI news segment, the coding streams, and much more. So please consider doing and giving just $1 if you can. And with that, let's return to the podcast itself. So yeah, you that was a perfect segueing into this, and I wanted to do this somewhere in the middle of the podcast, if you don't mind. Where were we? Yeah, so my great categories, and yeah, as you mentioned, we talked about this in the podcast, and I'm aware, and I'm reiterating some of my earlier points, and that's completely intentional, and I think it's beneficial because things develop, and we change, and we might have new thoughts on this, and this is something interesting, and I think we should keep this conversation in the spotlight. So the last category I listed myself are crazy hobbyists, crazy in the best sense of the word. Basically, hobbyist developers are the most competitive and the best ranking on the ladder. I mean, the top three bots are all hobbyists, crazy or Locutus Purple Wave, who do this in their spare time. And with that, it's hard to give a good monetary reward to many people because the average developer salary is probably better than that if you just count the hourly rate.
Yeah, for most people, it's a hobby. Probably 70-80% of the people are hobbyists. There's a couple of businesses that are involved, and there's some academics of various levels involved as well. But the hobbyists are the vast majority.
And it's interesting to think about that maybe the data the various bots generate could be valuable. I think bot replays are well, you can make a lot of them in a short amount of time, but if someone figures out how to analyze them for some independent learning algorithm, they become much more valuable. Imagine if you only need the replays of your opponent to analyze what he does and what he does not do.
So this kind of leads on to another topic, and I'm not sure if this has been discussed on the podcast, but there have been a few reach outs from the professional StarCraft Brood War community, or what's left of it really, about the possibility of using bots as practice partners. Because there's some issues with using humans as practice partners. One, they're expensive. Two, they have loose lips for professional practice, and they get bored with doing the same thing over and over again. So I think that there's an opportunity for a couple of these higher end bots, if they so wished, to act as consultants to professional players, where the professional player or professional team requests that they get forepooled on the specific map in the specific method, um, 20 times, and they want to practice against that and be able to do that whenever they want. There's an opportunity to do something like that down the road, I think. Um, Similarly, other types of really custom sorts of build older practice partner type things, um, that a professional will want to practice against, but not necessarily give on that he's practicing against that. And also where the professional player can run specific builds versus specific responses and kind of feel out how those would function. I think is pretty interesting. And it's something that really hasn't been explored too much. Um, Motaz has sort of his AI coach system, but that's different than a custom tailored bot that is configured as a consultant to a professional player.
And you are reading my mind, and this is exactly what I wanted to talk about. In the meantime, let's not ignore the chat. Alisander just joined, and he says that the audio is very quiet. I well hope that's only a problem for him, but I will check that out. And also, John Chassul asked that what do we think about the presentation from the SEIDA team, and they mentioned the future and current goals of the project and the collaboration that they have in the academic side from universities of South Korea and Hong Kong. I myself didn't see that presentation, so I can't comment on that. Have you?
I I have. I really enjoyed it. I think it's really very interesting. There's sort of a language barrier involved a lot between the English speaking academic competitive community and the South Korea one, unfortunately. Um, and that kind of impedes information going either way, um, which makes it things happen oftentimes on the English speaking Discord. We don't see as much as of what's occurring on the South Korea side of things. Maybe there's a student or two a month that asks a question or something in English, but other than that, we're not. I think most of us are not involved in the day to day of what's occurring over there.
Yeah, and yet again, you just spoke about something I wanted to later it literally in my show notes. So you are reading my mind. Mm. I think you're some kind of ethical hacker. I'm beginning to wonder that you're not that ethical, and you're looking at my screen right now.
Hey, my lesser known mentalism career might be showing. I'm just kidding.
Oh, maybe you're just psychic. That's okay. I accept that. So where were we? Oh yeah, how did you see and maybe have an opinion on the presentation?
Yes, I did. Whoops. There's some echo I heard, but okay, now it's good. So I did give a, brief look. Excuse me. Brief look at their presentation. Um, I think their research is pretty solid, and I was very impressed by how far they, excuse me, they achieved with their reinforcement learning. For example, the voucher micro, it's learned. So there are, for example, I think 12 directions a voucher can go to at any time, and also it can decide to attack or do something else. So this is the action space, and they um, train the vulture in different scenarios. One, I mean, one of them is pretty simple, just a big map with no terrain. It's just a flat ground, and you can go pretty much anywhere you want. But also they in other scenarios they have some obstacles like buildings or terrains. So it made the vultures made things a bit difficult for the vultures to kite the circlings. But yes, I was kind of quite impressed by their research, and I actually Also, aside from that, I also ran a few games versus the ideas with my bot, and I was kind of I was also quite impressed by how much it how quickly it can adapt to my bot's different strategies. For example, if ideas thought that my bot rushed him, so in the next game, it would instantly delay his expo at natural, but for example, put on another factory to fend off the early aggression, which was very impressive. I mean, it's very important, especially in a tournament. You need to react fast if you lost the game previously, otherwise you just keep losing games. So yeah, in general, quite impressed by what they did there, and well, I'm hoping that they will return someday.
Okay. Well, so it's interesting. Uh, we were looking at um, the binaries from Audius and comparing them to SIDA, and a lot of the file hashes are identical. um, but to my eye, there are things that are different, which is interesting. Um, so I think that there's almost no changes between SIDA and ADIAS, except for perhaps in the machine learning file. And that may be it that's changed, at least on the public version, between the two.
Yeah, all right. So before I forget, I wanted to bring up, and with Avastar, I kind of wanted to segue into this topic, that the man versus machine aspect. And you are familiar that I've worked with this a little bit in the past, and I'm not promising anything, but I'm returning to working on this again. I have something in the background. It's a little bit different than I originally imagined, but basically I had I had time to think about this, and I still on the opinion that pro gamer support is one of the best ways to maybe advertise this, or maybe not pro gamer, but what is the phrase that gamers who are competitive gamers, maybe, so gamers who want to learn, practice, and be better. And as you said, if I can practice against an opponent who consistently 4-pulls every time in the same way, that is invaluable. So with that in mind, I'm working on the man versus machine client yet again, and it is my observation that gamers want convenience and a pleasant play experience above all else. And you have drop launcher, you can set up your stuff, but the average gamer will not do that. He will see the GitHub URL and get scared away by the source code files. And even if often it is some nonsense technical difficulty, you get a random error and you don't have anything to go on. So I intend to change that and have something that just works. Let's hope that I can achieve that. And what I feel is we as developers, usually very highly skilled people enter this field, and they don't really want, or no, like user friendliness is not necessarily a priority for them. And you end user friendliness, not developer friendliness, because most of the tools I saw are very handy and good to use as a developer, but maybe not as a user. So yeah, let's make something that is easy to use and maybe pleasant to use as well.
That reminds me that I never sent you that document that you asked for. I will do that after this.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about that. So yeah, and with man and machine, this is one of the great ways to promote playing again, promote this bot scene, because I made a few posts in the Team Liquid forums, and it seems to me that people are actually very interested in this. They just don't know how, and they don't want to learn to code or don't want to do anything that is really hard to set up. They want just to play, and in this we are competing with gaming platforms like Steam or Battle.net, and it's not an easy thing. It's really not.
Yep, you got to have an easy to use environment.
And
I
yep.
think Drop Launcher is very good for this purpose, isn't it? But I'm not sure if there's any drawback that people think.
Well, I had an experience with a friend recently. When I described, we set up Drop Launcher, did everything. It worked on my machine, and it didn't work on his, and we couldn't figure it out. And he's not technical, and like remotely figuring out it's very hard. And I frankly I don't have the patience for it for a long time. So this is just, I mean, it's not acceptable for an average gamer. Uh, you might have some opinions on that. You might think that gamers are spoiled, but this is how it is.
Yeah, I can agree that Drop Launcher works really good for sort of people who are more technical or IT people or things like that. But having sent Drop Launcher and setups to amateurs and low-level professionals to play before, it almost inevitably ends up with an hour of me on a remote desktop to make it work in their environment. So.
And unless you're someone like IBM or Oracle, you just can't get away with that.
How is are you gonna do SSC AIT this fall? How?
Well, so sort of. I think the biggest reason that I've been thinking about whether to participate or not lately. Um, the biggest reason is that I'm not entirely happy about the recent, you know, the recent addition of those Locutus forks. And first of all, there's some rules on the SSC AIT page that's saying if you're a fork of some other bot, then you must acquire the approval from the original author before you can continue. But I don't think any of these forks can has ever done so, and it just set me off, and made me think that this tournament is not, well, as far as I can tell, not very well sort of organized, because the rules are not entirely followed by some of the bots, and they're still there, doing things. But on the other hand, I understand that I think a lot of people can argue that we need to give them more time before they can make some changes. I understand. I've also done something similar. My bot itself is also a fork of Iron, and I spent quite some time, improving it. But I, I mean, still, my point holds that the rules must be upheld. Otherwise, just don't create them. So with the current situation, I'm still not sure if I will participate. I will still prepare for it till the last moment, but things can change, and I cannot say 100% sure that I'll participate in the coming tournament.
Yeah, I understand. Um, I think SSCIT has gone through years of being pretty good at enforcing rules, and other years not as good. Generally, though, the rules are not enforced very strictly until the tournaments actually start. So the ladders are sort of a free for all until the competitive season goes around, and then everyone gets emails, and they start cracking down. And last year probably half the field got disabled pre-tournament start for rule violations or um, not wanting to compete or for whatever reason. Um, so it's interesting, the rules that even though the rules say they're the same during the ladder and during the competitive season, they're really not.
Yeah, I understand. Perhaps the rules are only for the tournament phase. But yeah, well, like I said, I'll wait and see. It's not my decision is not final yet. It's still it largely depends on what people do after the tournament starts, which is around the 20th of December or maybe earlier this year. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's I understand this, but I'll just wait and see.
What are your thoughts on Torch Up?
I'm sorry, with the torch, the pie torch, or is there
The
something?
Torch Up tournament being sponsored by Sloth and their academic.
Oh yeah, I'm interested in that because it does not require open source, which is quite good for me because my company does not like open sourcing stuff. So I will consider it. Yes.
Yeah, because that would give you, a second tournament that you can compete in during the year. So I that's good to hear that there's another opportunity there for you.
Yes, I'm aware of this tournament. I appreciate their effort, slot effort to organize this event. Yeah, I would seriously consider participating.
I will say that I think that their event, even though it's the first time it's being run externally to the public, um, it is well supported. It's tied to the FOSDEM, which is the free open source. What is it? The free and open source developers something meeting in Brussels in Belgium. Um, so it has a large conference behind it. It has professional people involved. The rule set was sent to me and so almost all the other major tournament organizers for review and comment before being posted. And I have a lot of faith that in Sloth that who will or Space Beam through the Space Beam community that they'll do an expert level job with it. So I have a lot of confidence there.
That's some very promising news to hear, and like I said, really appreciate these people's effort in organizing such an event, and I hope more events like that can happen in the future.
Yeah, me too. It's hard to know in advance how things will turn out, but I have a pretty high level of confidence. My in my opinion, Aid is probably the most professionally run tournament of the year, and COG CIG is an example of one that maybe is not run so well. But I think that the Torch Up tournament may end up being, kind of top three in prestige of tournaments over the long haul. So I think that that's really appealing.
Yeah, I think it is great that we have another tournament. Let's have as many as we can, and it's not like anything can go wrong. So, what's the worst case scenario here?
Yeah, and also the key thing is that this tournament supports multi-core and GPU and has native support for Linux containers, Torchgraph bots, Python, Lua, etc. So really kind of a special, unique aspect beyond what is normally possible. Um, from what I understand from their backend setup, um, they're basically using the largest AWS CPU GPU instance for the machines. So you're going to have access to an unbelievable amount of resources in comparison to a tournament like SSCA AIT, which is 8-year-old CPUs, a much more restricted environment. Um, so it really opens up some possibilities to do some things that have not been possible before for performance reasons.
Yeah, and I was talking with Michelle about this, and yeah, SSCIT is very great, but it is not to be relied on in these matters, and it's just an academic research project, so you can't build on their infrastructure, and yeah, we shouldn't expect that from them. And yeah, that's why I set up my own servers, and they are ready to go when I figure out stuff.
Yeah, and don't construe that means nothing bad about SSC AIT. That just means that they're an academic project. They're an older academic project. The state of their hardware is dependent on the donations and the academic support that they receive. And it's just a little bit older of a system, but it's very reliable and has been used for years. So,
and it does the job it was made for perfectly. So yes, it is nothing bad against SSCI tournament. Quite the contrary.
and it does bring up a good point that developers should write code that is not just pushes the boundaries, but there's something to be said about efficiency and execution. Um, that SSC AIT really pushes the limits of being efficient with CPU resources in some ways. And that is a challenge to itself. And I think, ironically, over time, actually, the older state of their hardware and the limited resources that are provided provide their own sort of challenge that makes it unique. So, and it very both academically and developmentally interesting, right? So, um, there are some real positive aspects there that are not intuitive.
Absolutely. So, circling back a little bit to the man versus machine thing, I was thinking about there was always this sentiment that, oh, we should wait for remastered support, oh, we should wait for BW API 5. I think it's the other way around. If we or more specifically me, can develop a reliable man versus machine client, even with 1.16, that gets used and known. And I'm on it. Although help is always welcome, so I'm on it. Then it will spur the need and maybe speed up things. And we shouldn't just wait for someone else to do something. We should take charge. And I'm saying we, but this is my thoughts. I'm not saying anyone should do anything. I'm not in control of other people's lives. So yeah, I think. We should just take the initiative in this, and in the long run, or maybe in the not so long run, I want to develop a competitive man versus machine scene, because I think that that is something there is an actual need for, and and that is one thing, and the practice aspect and just the PvE aspect, that you don't have to play against some random 12-year-old who is toxic as hell, is encouraging. And yeah, that's my goals. These are my goals.
Yeah, it's good. I'm just sort of, it's been so many years of kind of waiting for SCR to be official and what's going to happen with BW API 5. And, there, I know that there are projects going on in the background, but I'm kind of staying outside of that whole world and letting those people do their thing. And I'll kind of wait and see how it all turns out in the end.
Yeah, and I think nothing will happen until we do something about it. It's kind of a self-reinforcing loop.
in some ways, but there are things happening. They're just not obvious to the surface. So
Yeah, of course.
Nightcat is still on the BWAPI 5 project, as far as I understand. That hasn't changed. So
Yeah, I'm convinced that BWAPI 5 will get done. That's I don't think anyone should doubt that.
yeah.
Oh yeah, and one other point is recently I saw some bots by various Asian universities, uh, and I think it's great because we didn't really have any kind of attention from that part of the world, and I would like to somehow maybe get into the uh, spotlight of South Korea, but I know nothing about South Korea, and I don't know if they consume English language content at all. So that might be a hard thing to do, but if we want to get more attention, maybe that's where we should go.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's uh, it's hard to see how it all turns out. I think it would be good to have sort of a Korean-speaking representative from the community that can help facilitate that interaction. But as far as I know, there hasn't been really anyone that's sort of stepped up to fill that role. But it would be really nice if that existed. So if there's someone that's listening that's from the that speaks Korean really well and is maybe lives in South Korea or is involved in the university stuff over there, that would be interested in being a sort of a collaborative access point for information. I think that a lot could come of that.
Yeah, definitely. And sadly, this is not something we can do by ourselves. I mean, if it's code, we can learn any language, but I don't expect any of us to learn South Korean. Well, Korean. I think the language is the same. Anyway, that's all the topics I had for today. Let's well answer any kind of questions, but I don't really see any questions in the chat that we haven't talked about. And yeah, if you have something else, then let's talk about that.
I was just a little bit curious for how it's been. You know, you've been updating really regularly with your bot pretty much for most of the year, most of the summer. What has that experience been like having such a regular development cycle?
So can you repeat the question again?
Oh, so I've just been noticing with your bot on the ladder that you seem to update, every couple of days and really have for almost 6 months now. What's that experience been like having such regular updates and feedback and things like that on the ladder?
Yeah, well, it's quite intensive in my opinion. But well, I mean, this so the cycle goes like this. So I identify. So I watch replays every day, and oftentimes I spot some problems or maybe even bugs or crashes, and I try to fix it, and have a few simple testing. Then I upload. That sort of explains why I update it so frequently. In some occasions, maybe a couple of times per day. Um, but but yes, it's quite intensive, and I think but also this is just mostly my day job, so I have to. So that's what I do. Um, and I don't feel like too pressured about it because I like this pace a lot. And I like getting things done and resolving you know the problems, and that's what I've been doing. Not just for the past 6 months. Well, I think it's been like this for maybe a year or more than that. But when I first started, it may be slow. I didn't push as many updates as nowadays. It's mostly me studying the code, Igor's code, and trying to get myself familiar with the his concepts, his what he wanted to do. But later on, moving on to nowadays, um, it's more about not only about the fixing the problems, but also adding some new content. For example, I didn't mention this, but I've been busy with opponent strategy identification, which I think is pretty important for if you wanted to be serious about the competition aspect. Iron already has some strategy identification built in. For example, circling rush, or for example, mass hydra, that kind of thing. But I don't think that's comprehensive enough. For example, what if a Protoss opponent is doing a 14 nexus or one gate fast expansion? Can the bot, be able to identify, not only be able to identify both strategies, but also be able to identify the difference between the two? Because I think the two strategies, although they're somewhat similar, but they're still different in some way. So so in other words, if you can be you can do that, be reliably identify different strategies, often similar ones, then the reactions can be different too. For example, for 14 Nexus, ironically, I saw a loss of Cracio versus Foyang Risho this morning, or Ire, and it lost to 14 Nexus because the huge economical advantage gained from the 14 Nexus pretty much enabled the Protoss to just move to the Terran base and win the game. So definitely something has to be done, otherwise you are, and something right has to be done. Otherwise, you just even for a number one bot, it's just really hard to come back from that point. So yeah, I mean, this is my sort of recent development, or what I've been doing, the strategy identification, but also the micro aspect of things, which sort of explains why I had to update very frequently. Not only did I want to see if the new micro caused some problems, but also I want to see how it fares with different opponents and different opponents' builds or strategies, and what kind of things that I can improve further. That's yeah. I mean, I would say this is a pretty good time for me, because I think I become more and more passionate about this AI or bot development, and I feel my time is not enough, and every day is there's a lot to do, but it's a good thing in my opinion, and yeah, I hope that gives you some idea of how my experience has been lately.
Yeah, I remember last year around this time, the goal was to try and um, qualify for the SSCIT playoffs and to try and be a top 10 bot. And your bot's been a top 10 bot almost the whole year. So it's really been good.
It still is.
Yeah, and it's really good. I was going to ask about um, short-term fixes versus long-term development, how you balance those internally. So, as you're maintaining it day to day, how do you balance that versus the want to make larger changes and do bigger projects? Do you do little things and replays and little fixes in the morning and then work on a bigger project in the afternoon, or do you have a way that you divide it up? somehow?
My scheme sort of goes like the following. I always assign pretty much the highest priority to stuff that is important and at the same time emergent require quick response. For example, a crash or for example a bug. For example, the command center tries to float to the natural, but there are some mines laid by the vultures, so it cannot land, and it will just stay there forever and cause big production freeze, which is both a big problem and also cause some frustration to me because it's just not a pleasant thing to perceive. So so really the highest priority goes to things like this, important things and things that may break down my bot. I'll try to fix those things as much as quickly as I can. But my approach is that I only fix first for the specific build that such problem is in, and I want to see, I want to test it out if first of all, if my fix did solve the problem, and second of all, I update the bot and try to see if it if the because the latter there are more games to be running per day, so I can get a better sense of whether the fix has been working. But eventually the fix will be extended to other builds as well, because I think some of the problems exist for a lot of builds rather than the one build that I observed it. But the priority will go down as well because the fix is already there, but it's just like extending the fix to other builds. But aside from this top priority thing, so the next priority will go to the build order development or new builds or the micro, and also some sort of research too. If I found out there's something that I can write a paper out of, then the time will be spent there too. But in terms of bot development, yes, the next priority would be builds and micro, and I think this is more of a long term. They are more of a long term goal because especially the micro. For example, the TBT tank micro, I wouldn't say it can be like improved drastically in a short amount of time, like days. Well, I doubt it because yeah, I mean it's a tricky area to dive into. So it's where my secondary priority goes to, and then I don't know. Thirdly, my time will go to the replay analysis and watching some the games from the pros. There's some good casters too. So guess I mean setting priority is how I balance my time in terms of bot development. That's my short answer.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always fun to hear how people assign time and develop and work on the different aspects. It's very interesting to me. Something going back to the strategy recognition system, I think that there's a consensus sort of among the top competitors that there's a real strong need for a library or a system for recognizing opponent build orders and openings. And I'm seeing that, Purple Wave and Lakutis and McRave and Banana Brain and you and Crazio are all sort of doing the same thing in parallel. Makes me wonder if it would be better if there was a library that was created that was just a huge build order recognition system for opponents based on scouting data, like a probability score assigned, and then people could do with that what they want. But I wonder if everybody's just repeating the same work.
I think that there are definitely some overlapping areas. For example, if opponent is doing, so I think the reason is that there are some prevalent builds for each matchup. For example, for Protoss, there are like I said before, the 14 Nexus or maybe 4-gate Goon versus the Terran as a rush. I mean, there are some certain popular builds and people try to prepare for. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing, and that's especially painful when your bot ranks very high on the ladder. But not to ignore those mid tier ones or the bottom tier ones. But I think this is universally a important topic to tackle. And yes, to your point, I think there's need to develop such a library, but I'm just not sure how we do that because you know for me, as I said, the company does not really like open sourcing, so I'm not sure how to contribute to such a project if other people will also agree to collaborate on this. On this topic. But yes, my stance is I'd love to, and I would fully support the construction of such a library. But I just don't know how exactly this can be done.
Yeah, what makes it more complicated is almost all the authors that are working on this problem, they're writing in different languages. So it's not like it's complicated fast, and needs play in with the scouting system and all this. I will say that Purple Wave probably has the most advanced enemy opening recognition system, and that it's really worth a read for authors to take a look at that system, um, and how it operates. It does a pretty good job a lot of the time. Um, there's two almost completely separate questions. One is what you recognize, and the second side is what you do with all that information. But Purple Wave's recognition system is pretty good. And I think it's worth a read for the other authors working on similar projects.
Yeah, thanks for the tips. I think my system is kind of in a very early stage of very preliminary or very like very simple. For example, a lot of it, a lot of the things recognition is based on timings and the opponent unit count or composition. And it's also using some match numbers, which are based on some past games. And what's making this kind of complicated is there are a lot of other factors playing there too. For example, the map factor. If the map is 2-player map and if it's a 3 or 4-player map, then things can be different when you want to identify opponent strategy, because not only the map size changes, but also things like your scouting mechanism, the timing also can also play a role. So yes, I definitely appreciate your tip, and yeah, I think that's a very good point that I should take a look at the Purple Waves system.
Yeah, and you're really right that it depends greatly on rush distance, a ton. The difference in 4-pull timing between close positions on Python and Benzene is massive. Almost not even the same planet. And what you should do, um, depending on that, varies greatly. And on the larger maps, the scout path and what you see and when, you may misrecognize things depending on timing. So you have to take timing and map into consideration when you start talking about build order recognition.
Yeah, well, sort of for now, I'm kind of cheating on this because I'm using match numbers. But I think the long term, I would hope that I can come up with some regression model just sort of figuring out, for example, the relationship between rush distance and full pull timing, instead of say, hey, on Python, if he has links before 2 minutes, then it's doing full pull. I mean, for now it's a band-aid solution, but in the long term, I would hope some more sophisticated things can be done.
Yeah. I think that there's another side of this too, which is a tool to. I thought that the best way to do this would be to create a tool that would spit out the build orders of both sides of a match and run it through 50,000 replays on SSC AIT. Count all the different categories of replays, put it out in a big database, and then try and match that up with scouting info that's gained. So you have this huge database of information that you can pull from that would be effective. I thought that would be a good way to do it, but I don't think anyone's done it that way yet.
Yeah, that'll be the long-term goal. And I also think there lacks a way to really automate the replay analysis process. I mean, for now, I'm not sure, but I think the majority of bot authors, they just they're doing the replay analysis by eyeballing the replay themselves instead of using some image recognition algorithms or other tools to sort of automate this process and make it more sophisticated.
Well, Locutus uses CherryViz.
Yeah, CherryViz is kind of that second stage of replay analysis using a tool. And now that there's Locutus and also Stix using it, along with, of course, Dragon and TSMU's efforts, I think maybe that'll expand into more places as a usable tool.
I would love to have TSMU on the podcast someday, but he's not really up to it for the moment. Or not up to it, that's not what he is. He did not want to come on so far.
Yeah, I would love to hear him talk too. Reading his code is an exercise in how dumb I am.
Yeah, he's quite talented.
Anyway, it's fun.
All right, one more question from John Strassul that do you guys think that we are going to see? Are we going to see a new Cherry Pie version eventually? Yeah, I guess I can't really say much about that.
No. We can get into the why and all that, but that's really questions better asked to people that were previously on that team. So I don't expect that Facebook is continuing development. They have other bigger things to fry. And I think it may be. I think that they had sort of assumed that AlphaStar would at this point be beating professional players, and that it was just a money versus computational power problem. However, it's proving harder for the Google AlphaStar development team than people had thought. They've claimed a lot of success, but really they haven't done that well versus professionals and higher level players on ladder, at least not yet.
Oh yeah.
And even they are talking about abandoning the project as well. Google is. So to me, I think that perhaps the Facebook team thought that Google was going to get 100% the way there, but Google's maybe only 85 or 90% of the way there and maybe walking away from the project. So maybe they might have abandoned the project a little early, but I'm not really in the know there. So that's just outside perspective.
I think they can beat on the ladder the 92% 8% of the players, which is impressive, but there is still the 8% which is not negligible. So they didn't solve this game yet. Far from it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. You know, beating 92% of the players, it's extremely impressive. It's the vast majority of the players that play the game online, but it is not that higher echelon professional player section. And they have not solved the game, right?
Especially that player skill is not a linear line. It's not linear.
Right.
It's more of a curve. So yeah, the best players they didn't beat yet.
Yeah. And people often underestimate the jump from going from amateur to professional. Keep in mind that players play for fun in the evenings and on the weekends, and a professional player has a salary and is paid to play all day, every day. There's a massive difference in skill. Even from a bottom level professional player to a high tier amateur, that jump is almost a gulf. So
Yep.
I think this is also true when it comes to bots. Well, once again, speaking from my personal experience, it feels like the jump from, for example, the 50th or 60th to the top 20 is kind of easy now that I think about it. But once you're in the top 10, and if you wanted to go higher, for example, from the 8th to 6th or even 4th, then it takes considerably more effort and more skills or more code to be able to do that. It's kind of a sort of an invisible line between sort of professional bots and amateur bots. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use amateur bots for those that are like below the 10th, but still my point is that there's the gap between the really good bots and the rest is kind of ginormous, in my opinion.
I agree with you. You know, the difference between a top 20 bot and a bot that's in 50th is pretty huge, but the gap between a bot that's in 5th and bot that's in 1st is extreme. The amount of software that's involved in code and customization and projects and work, it gets pretty wild fast. Because you start to realize how creative those other top 10, top 5 people are, and how hard their bots hit. And it starts to get nasty. Start to realize how much work that they put in to be where they're at and be as competitive as they are.
Okay, with that, I think we should just conclude the cast now. I basically haven't been bringing up any new topics for the last few minutes. So, yeah, I think we have come to the end. Do you maybe disagree?
I'm all good. It's just fun to talk. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, anytime, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
All right, see you next time.